Asking questions is literally our job. Demanding facts and answers instead of just taking a president's word for it. So you're in Ohio right now. You've been holding these town halls in red districts across the country. You're saying Democrats need to do a better job of reaching Trump voters. The issues you identified there were immigration, right, DEI, and woke. You think Democrats' problem was that you just didn't do a good enough job explaining the policies and not that voters simply didn't just reject what you were selling, particularly on immigration, I wonder?
No, on immigration, what we were asking for is a bipartisan policy that strengthens immigration control.
Tim Walsh walked into that studio thinking it was going to be another easy, cozy television appearance. But Jake Tapper flipped the script and turned the spotlight into a full-on bonfire. It was like showing up to class without your homework and the teacher suddenly throws your mistakes up on the big screen for everyone to see. That's the level of humiliation we're talking about. One minute, Walsh looked confident. The next, he was cooked faster than a microwaved Hot Pocket. And trust me, you won't believe just how messy it got.
Not only Biden, but Kamala Harris was heralding Bidenomics, pretending that there wasn't a problem at the border. And then fundamentally, this idea that President Biden was up for another 4 years of the job, while Americans in poll after poll for year after year were saying he's too old to do the job. Your party stood against all of those things.
Look, Joe Biden coming in.
Before we move on, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe because you definitely don't want to miss this one. Watching Tim Walz sit down with Jake Tapper was like watching a kid show up to a spelling bee armed with crayons. He was doomed before the first question even landed. You could practically see the sweat start to bead before Tapper leaned in. Imagine stepping onto national television, ready to flex your governor muscles, only to trip all over your own talking points like that clumsy uncle who tries to break dance at a wedding. That's the exact level of cringe we're talking about here.
Don't you think your party needs to acknowledge that President Biden was not up for the job of running for re-election and that this was a major mistake by the
He made that decision.
I know, but you all went along with the idea that he was up for it and he wasn't. And everybody saw it and the country rejected it.
It wasn't just bad, it was historic. This wasn't a simple fumble, it was a full-on faceplant. Tapper didn't even have to press hard, he just asked the questions. And suddenly Walz was spiraling like a broken Roomba, bumping into every wall in sight. Each answer landed like an accidental comedy sketch, half gibberish, half desperate spin, and all of it capped off with that forced politician's grin, the one they paste on when they realize the cameras are capturing their downfall in crystal clear 4 kelvins.
We are in this unprecedented situation right now because Democratic voters had a deep lack of confidence in President Biden's ability to serve another term. And this is a point that your fellow Minnesota Democrat, Congressman Dean Phillips, was trying to make when he challenged Biden in the primary. You belittled his effort. You called it a political sideshow. You called it a crazy thing. But wasn't Dean Phillips actually right? Wasn't he bringing up an issue that was correct and you were on the wrong side of it?
And let's be real, Walz has been moving through politics like that substitute teacher who honestly believes the kids respect him, the kind who walks in saying, "All right guys, let's all be cool," while the classroom is already on fire. He strutted into that CNN interview with the exact same energy, full of confidence, zero prep. Only this time, the classroom wasn't a bunch of teenagers tossing paper airplanes. It was Jake Tapper sitting across from him, calmly and politely dismantling every single delusion Walz brought to the table.
I think that you're the one that set this tone, and there's this shift. The Harris campaign seems to be following your lead, echoing this language. Why do you think weird is a more effective attack line against Trump than what Democrats have been done previously, which is argue that he's an existential threat to democracy?
Yeah, and it's an observation on this, and being a school teacher, I see a lot of things, but my point on this is people kept talking about, look, Donald Trump is going to put women's lives at risk. That's 100% true.
The meltdown hit peak awkward when Walz tried puffing up his chest about inflation and the economy, acting like Minnesota has been some kind of fiscal paradise under his watch, when in reality the state budget has been held together with more gimmicks than a carnival magician's act. One second he's bragging about growth, the next he's stumbling over deficits like a guy scrambling to explain to his wife why the credit card statement looks like a weekend in Vegas. And Tapper, he just sat there with that deadpan expression people get when the waiter forgets the food but still drops the bill on the table.
I think what we allowed ourselves to do is we got timid, and then when we got power, we didn't pass things that improved people's lives. This whole idea, I think the Democratic Party gets theoretical, talk about food insecurity. People are hungry, get them.
And then came inflation. Walz actually had the nerve to act like it was some myth cooked up in the imagination of struggling families, while people across the Midwest are literally counting pennies just to figure out if they can afford eggs or gas. He sat there on CNN pretending the economy is thriving. He made it sound like Minnesota is some magical mix of Silicon Valley and Disney World, when in reality families are choosing between heating their homes or paying the rent. Imagine gaslighting people about their own grocery bills. Walz basically told them, don't trust your wallet, but trust me, that's clown energy that deserves its own circus tent. And then he pivoted to the border, parroting the same script every Democrat's been running. Downplay the issue until the cameras zoom in on buses full of migrants pulling into their city. It was all performance, pure theater. Watching Walz scramble on CNN was like watching interpretive dance, except the routine was titled "Man Confused by Basic Questions." The arm flailing, the awkward half-smiles, the random detours into vague talk about values and community. It wasn't leadership, it was the political version of bad improv. At one point, you half expected him to start juggling or whip out a kazoo, just to distract everyone from the fact his answers had no substance at all.
Say she's not here to say I told you so, although obviously that's what she was saying about all the Trump chaos. We're seeing, I have to say though, what does I told you so really mean here? I mean, people heard her message. They did not vote for her. She lost every battleground state. You yourself have criticized the Harris-Walz campaign for being too cautious. She may have told the American people, she may have warned the American people, but she didn't do it compellingly enough to win.
And this wasn't just embarrassing for Walz. It was a disaster for Democrats trying to keep their Biden narrative afloat. Imagine banking on Tim Walz to sell your economic story, only to watch him implode on live television like some sketchy infomercial gadget snapping in half mid-demo. You just know White House staffers were watching with their heads in their hands, whispering, "Why on earth did we let this guy speak?" It wasn't an interview, it was a national warning. Do not send Walz out unsupervised. And the cherry on top, his sad attempt to look tough. By the end, even Tapper looked like he was fighting back laughter. The real kicker, Walz actually thought this was his big moment. He probably walked into CNN after rehearsing in the mirror, picturing Twitter lighting up with applause. Instead, what he got was the internet's version of slipping on a banana peel. His stumbles spread faster than any talking points, and suddenly he wasn't the confident leader he imagined. He was the punchline of the week. Minnesota didn't get a statesman that day. It got a meme factory.
That is the absolute point. And look, when I criticize, I'm criticizing myself. I own this. I'm part of the ticket. And somebody has to come up with a strategy. I think this is exactly right. This is the thing. Look, Democrats, it was a good night in Wisconsin. I was over there. We saw that happen. Donald Trump's doing this. Just to be clear, nobody on the Democratic side is celebrating this. And those folks in the street are not celebrating that Donald Trump's making all these errors. I think what the vice president's saying is that was pretty self-evident that he was going to do that.
And let's not ignore the timing here. Democrats are scrambling to defend Biden, downplay inflation, and pretend the border crisis doesn't exist. They needed a strong, polished voice, and instead, they sent out Tim Walz, who immediately turned into a walking blooper reel. It was like putting the water boy in the Super Bowl and expecting him to score a touchdown. Walz didn't just drop the ball, he punted it straight into his own face. The irony is almost poetic. This is a guy who built his whole brand on being the steady Midwestern leader, calm, pragmatic, grounded. Yet the second he faced real pushback, he unraveled faster than a cheap sweater in the dryer. That's the political equivalent of losing a thumb war to a toddler. And sure, the spin machine will fire up, he'll go back to Minnesota, his team will issue statements, they'll pretend it was some bold truth-telling moment. But the clips don't lie. America saw what really happened. A governor who tried to big league a national audience and ended up reduced to fumbling excuses and awkward body language. It wasn't bold, it wasn't strong, it was the pure definition of humiliated.
Stood against all of those things.
Look, I think we got intellectualized on this. I think the fact of the matter is Joe Biden did soft land the economy. None of us are saying we should be soft on the border, but we allow a vacuum and Donald Trump fills it, the 800-pound gorilla, and their narrative starts to stick, and we look weak.
So here's the reality check. Tim Walz isn't the rising Democratic star some folks are trying to hype him up as. He's not the Midwest whisperer who can soothe flyover country with a calm voice. He's a guy who just showed the entire country that when the heat gets turned up, he cracks like cheap glass. And the real nightmare for his party? The midterms and every 2028 hopeful were watching. If this is what they're betting their future on, they might as well start drafting concession speeches now. Walz embarrassed himself on CNN, and no amount of spin will erase the image of a governor unraveling in real time. Nobody cares how friendly you sound when their grocery bill looks like the national debt. And man, did he try to distract. Every time Tapper tightened the screws, Walz defaulted to the same tired trick, pivoting into vague platitudes. He dropped more community and values buzzwords than a Hallmark ad. If empty phrases could pay the rent, Minnesota would be debt-free by now. Instead, viewers got a masterclass in how to sound like you're saying something while actually saying nothing. It was like watching a blender spin on high, loud, chaotic, and producing absolutely zero substance.
I'm not talking about the violence. We've already established that. What's the difference between that and Tim Walz saying, I get a kick out of it?
First of all, look, Tim Walz is a complete moron to me. I have to be very honest, and I'm not surprised why the American people did not choose him. Nothing against him.
What made the whole thing so painfully awkward was the body language. Walz leaning in, nodding way too much, forcing out these nervous chuckles that basically screamed, "Please believe me, I'm begging you." The overcompensation was wild. You could almost hear his inner monologue. If I just smile hard enough, maybe they won't notice I have no clue what I'm saying. Spoiler alert, they noticed. Everyone noticed. And while Walz was fumbling like that, Tapper didn't even even have to break a sweat. Somewhere in DC, a staffer once pitched this brilliant idea. Let's put Tim on Tapper's show. He's great under pressure. I guarantee that staffer was updating their LinkedIn before the interview even finished airing. Because instead of defending Biden, Walz made the whole thing look like a cheap pyramid scheme. His economic message boiled down to, please, stop asking me questions before I completely collapse.
Donald Trump is potentially going to end constitutional liberties that we have, end voting. I do believe all those things are a real possibility, but it gives him way too much power. Listen to the guy. He's talking about Hannibal Lecter and shocking sharks and just whatever crazy thing pops into his mind. And I thought we just give him way too much credit. And I think one of the things is when you just ratchet down some of the the scariness or whatever and just name it what it is.
Come on, man. Minnesota deserves way better than this circus act. This is a state built on hard-working, straight-talking people who value honesty over cheap political games, and instead their governor turned into a late-night comedy sketch. Imagine being a Minnesotan, watching your leader stumble on national television, pretending the economy is fine while you're literally staring at a heating bill that just doubled. That's not leadership, that's gaslighting with a smile. And let's be real, this isn't Walz's first rodeo with embarrassment. He's got a track record of these awkward flops. But here's the twist. This interview didn't just humiliate him, it popped the fragile bubble around the Democratic talking points. They've been out here swearing Bidenomics is working, inflation is cooling, people should just start feeling good. And yet, the second a governor tried to sell that fairy tale live on CNN, it crumbled right in front of everyone. Why? Because reality doesn't cooperate with spin. The public isn't buying it literally or figuratively, and no amount of Tim Walz grinning awkwardly on television can cover up the fact that families are struggling.
President Trump argues that these tariffs are needed to bring American manufacturing back and to help American workers left behind in places like Minnesota. He has support from the UAW. What do you say to the UAW?
Here's the thing that the Democrats have to figure out. Donald Trump's language around this, he's not wrong that we've had manufacturing gutted. He's not wrong that we saw an outshoring. People of my generation were told, there aren't going to be any manufacturing jobs, so you need to go to college and rack up student loan debt. The problem is Donald Trump's solution to this is not the solution. Now, UAW is right. Certain tariffs, if they're on to steel or if they're targeted correctly, do make a difference.
Walz liked to think of himself as untouchable, tucked away in the Midwest, shielded from messy immigration issues until the buses of migrants started showing up in his own backyard. That's when the tough talk faded and the calls to Washington came quick. Tapper pressed him on it, and Walz's answers were about as sturdy as Jell-O in a sauna. He tried to strike that balance of compassionate yet tough, but instead he sounded flat out confused, like a guy trying to order vegan at a Texas barbecue joint. And the overconfidence? That's what made it worse. Social media lit him up like a Christmas tree. Clips of his stumbles went viral. Memes popped up everywhere. And just like that, he wasn't the confident governor anymore. He was the guy who couldn't even handle CNN. And let's be honest, that's the friendliest stage a Democrat could ask for. If you manage to embarrass yourself there, that's like losing a pillow fight to a toddler.
You said that you carried weapons in war, but you have never deployed actually in a war zone. A campaign official said that you misspoke. Did you?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly proud. I've done 24 years of wearing the uniform of this country. Equally proud of my service in a public school classroom, whether it's Congress or the governor. He's a liar. My record speaks for itself, but I think people are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do.
You disgust me. How can you live with yourself?
I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeve.
Meanwhile, Republicans are probably lining up to send Jake Tapper thank you cards because he did their job for them without even breaking a sweat. Walz's performance is going to live on in campaign ads for years, not because Tapper crushed him, but because Walz managed to crush himself. It was like handing your opponents a box of free ammo, neatly gift-wrapped, and saying, go ahead, use this against me. The brutal truth is Walz exposed himself as not ready for the big leagues. Sure, he can run Minnesota, give local speeches, pose for photos at the fairgrounds, but under the national spotlight, it's a completely different game. And in that game, he got smoked. He showed zero composure, zero command of the facts, and zero ability to pivot without stumbling. Instead, we saw a guy who couldn't even sell ice cream to kids on a scorching summer day. If this is the future, then the future looks like a blooper reel. The best way to sum up this disaster, picture someone trying to jog on a treadmill set way too high. At first they're smiling, waving at the cameras, looking fine, but then the legs give out, they stumble, flail, and go flying off the back straight into the wall. That was Tim Walz on CNN, a political treadmill wipeout, broadcast live for millions.
You just heard Republican Senator Cotton, a fellow veteran, criticize Vice President Harris over the Afghanistan withdrawal. She has said that she was the last person in the room when President Biden decided to pull out of Afghanistan. You served, for people who don't know, you served in the Army National Guard for 24 years, including in Afghanistan. You were the highest ranking enlisted man in Congress. What was your reaction to the way the Biden-Harris administration executed that withdrawal, both with the disaster at Abbey Gate and the thousands of Afghan allies left behind?
Yeah, I served in Europe in support of Operation Enduring
Okay.
Freedom, Jake. But the point, we have an issue in this country that is going to impact us. And if there is not a loyal opposition, if there's not some soul searching on our side, if there's not reaching out to those folks who are in the streets, they're leading right now.
So quick
I
question.
would tell everybody, you better get with them. Yeah.
Quick question, because we got to go. But you said you're not going to run for the Senate seat there. Are you going to run for a third term for governor? Are you possibly going to run for president in 2028?
Well, I'm certainly thinking about running again in Minnesota if that's what they want. I am not thinking about running in 2028. And my advice to folks is if in this moment you're planning for 2028, you're going to get rolled by the people in the...
What makes it even funnier is how inevitable it all was. Anyone paying attention could see this train wreck coming. Walz has always been more style than substance, more buzzwords than backbone, and the moment the spotlight got brighter, the cracks widened until the whole facade caved in. Tapper didn't humiliate him. Walz humiliated himself. Tapper just gave him the stage. By the end, it didn't even feel like an interview anymore. It was a live autopsy of Democratic messaging with Walz as the unwilling patient. He kept insisting he was fine, but everyone watching could see him bleeding credibility, hemorrhaging confidence, and flatlining politically. And the worst part? He probably walked off that set thinking he'd done all right. That's the kind of delusion you just can't coach out. So let's call it what it was, a political self-destruction disguised as an interview. Tim Walz walked in, hoping to build his brand, and walked out as late-night comedy material. The humiliation wasn't subtle, it was loud, unavoidable, and unforgettable. He wanted to look like a leader, but he ended up as a walking cautionary tale.